All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? And then as people trickle in, they can just join as we go. So maybe just a couple of quick little housekeeping things, and we'll jump into introductions. But ultimately, just a quick little background on some of the webinars that we do. So we try to aim for maybe about one webinar a month, and we break up the topics. A lot of times, a webinar that we do will actually lead us into the next webinar, or ideas will come from it from comments that come up in the chat box. And so last month we did a webinar. Um, Mostly targeted towards virtualizing programs in light of the COVID-19 restrictions. And we talked about some of the different tools, obviously, that we have in place at Reviewr, but just in general, ways that we can virtualize things to an extent. And in that conversation, we really kind of bolded out some cool ideas, and people were just asking us, well, like if you could dumb it down to like the 4 or 5 absolutely essentials, not even virtualizing it, just the 5 essentials to running a highly efficient award program, grant, scholarship, things like that, what would they be? And so we kind of took that and we decided to run with it and do a quick little webinar about that. We aimed for about 30 minutes on these. And so as we were playing that out, we were trying to think of who are some of the current clients we work with, or people within the industry that we thought would be a good group to join on. And I'll let Jen kind of jump in here shortly with an introduction, but Jen is with Glatz Management Services, and so she has a broad range of experience working with associations on a lot of different things, obviously not just awards, but she's also kind of been boots on the ground and has seen a lot of stuff. And so we thought we'd bring her on to kind of shed some light versus you guys just listening to me talk for 30 minutes about what I think are the most efficient ways to run them. So we'll kind of jump into some introductions here shortly. Before we go there, just again, a quick housekeeping. So for those of you who are not familiar with using Zoom, there is a built-in chat box. In a perfect world, when we do webinars, they're very conversational. It's not unheard of for us to completely diverge and go different directions based off of feedback that you guys are providing or topics that you want to talk about. So if you would just kind of go ahead and look for that chat box. If questions, comments come up either about the topic and about Reviewr, or about Jen and her background, or what they're doing at their company, feel free to throw them in the chat box. And then either as we go, if they're highly relevant, we'll go ahead and we'll talk about it. If not, we'll wait till the end, and we'll do a quick little rapid fire Q&A. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into some quick little introductions. I'll go ahead and start. So for those of you who either don't know about Reviewr or have never met with us beforehand, this will be probably the first time. If not, you've heard the spiel numerous times, but our background actually comes from working with people like yourselves. We come from kind of the nonprofit association space, specifically also within university systems. Our team was super involved as a volunteer, and so we were part of a lot of the different judging committees, not just for awards, but also grants, scholarships, board nominations, conference call for presenters, and things like that. And so back in about 2012, a lot of times those programs got facilitated with 3-ring binders and emails and Dropbox links. And there was one use case we actually had CD-ROMs with presentations mailed to us. And so trying to balance our own personal life, families and work and things like that with our volunteer efforts became a bit challenging. Specifically, there was one use case where we were asked to provide feedback about a certain applications, knowing that the 95% of them would not be selected for the grant, and how they could improve their grant writing moving forward. So we spent a whole lot of effort going through physical hard copy papers, annotating, leaving notes and feedback, and we turned it in. And we found out later, months later, that the organization took our scores and they kind of ran with it, and they actually threw our feedback away because at that point it was really challenging for them to relay it back to the applicant. So at that point we got kind of fed up with the process, and we said, look, why don't we build an online tool to make everybody's lives easier that are involved, from admins to applicants to review members to everybody in between, in hopes that by increasing efficiency, we can overall increase the engagement of the program and also make things like feedback sharing or some of those more higher touch points more realistic. So, today we work with thousands of organizations, not just associations, but organizations in general, doing really all different types of submission management. And kind of in that journey, we met Jen and some of her work that she's done, and she's been a great partner with us for some different campaigns over the course of the year. So maybe I'll turn it over to her just for a quick little intro about her involvement with awards, as well as what they're doing at her company.
Well, hi everyone. I am Jen Hendrickson. I'm a senior account executive for Glatz Management Services. I have been with the company. I'm in my 7th year there. I have managed 6 awards programs with one of my 3 clients, and we are going into our 2020 program. We're actually virtualizing it this year, given the current environment. So yeah, it's kind of just, we're based in the southwest suburbs of Chicago, so we're in Illinois here and happy to be here.
Perfect. So why don't we go ahead and jump into things? And again, when we do these webinars, I started off, typically I'll bullet out what my thoughts are for the 5 essentials to these programs. Jen might have a completely different list, which would be awesome. That way we can kind of intertwine them, and maybe she has some little tidbits or tips and tricks for you guys. But at the end of the day, if we can get one takeaway, if there's one small thing that we talk about that you can incorporate into your programs, then we consider that a win. The first item that we kind of want to run through is reducing the legwork to actually apply. And it's important to step back and maybe think about the audience on this webinar. Some of you guys do award programs, some of you guys do scholarships, some are doing grants, maybe a conference call for presenter. And so the application process for you guys is all going to be very, very different. At the end of the day, the workflows are pretty much the exact same. You have somebody that submits something, it needs to go somewhere, and then you guys need to review it and make a decision off of. Now, like in the sense of an award program, you're going to have, nominations, you have nominees, in grants, you have like post-grant follow-up surveys, and scholarships, you have a lot more letters of recommendation. So some of those small little tidbits are going to differ from one program to the next, but our goal here is to talk about, making the application process as simple as possible for the people who are applying. And so the very first thing that comes to my mind, and again, not even thinking about Reviewr technology, is ditching the paper. And I know a lot of times it's easier said than done. We've been doing things away for a long time. If you're part of academia or education, we know that paper is still a big thing. From a user experience, it is 2020. We're all very accustomed to using forms and technology, but also kind of just saving yourselves and watching out for your own back. It's really easy to lose data when paper is coming in. It gets quite expensive. One of our clients is actually the Arbor Day Foundation, and so we're very conscious about saving trees here, just working with them, and we're actually doing some cool campaigns about how many trees are being saved. So step number 1 is ditching the paper. And that kind of goes with the one-stop shopping. In a perfect world, everything stays in one spot. And then before I turn over to Jen for some of her thoughts, I do want to talk a little bit about splitting up for award programs, because this is something that we have a bit more experience with, that we see quite a bit of. But the entire process is making the submission as easy as possible for whoever it is involved. And so for some of you that do award programs, you guys actually don't have much involvement with the nominee. It's all from the nominator. And a nominator is doing this out of the kind of the goodwill of their heart. They're typically volunteering their time to submit a nomination. And so when they do that, you got to make sure that we're not having a high barrier for them to apply. What type of data does the nominator actually have? If they're going to have to sit down for 45 minutes to fill out a nomination, there's a very strong chance that they're going to bail. So one model that we're seeing quite a bit of is where you have kind of a dual process where the nominator fills out a very basic intro. Who are you nominating? Why? And then it actually sends out notifications to the nominee, and then they then will actually join the nomination and fill out some of the more comprehensive things like short answers and essays. They're the ones uploading the heavy file uploads and things like that. So maybe just a quick pause. I know, Jen, one thing that we've worked with some of your campaigns over the years is trying to simplify the submission process. Her program is super cool because it isn't just text-based or paper-based. They're using multimedia, and so anytime you start to include digital copies, you really got to think through making it easy.
Definitely. So one of the biggest parts of our awards program is photos. So we are very lucky that Reviewr has that capability to be able, not only photos, but high-res photos. And they can not only collect our content, but they can also collect those multimedia files, which we can then use both for collection and then carry on into our judging, as well as into our showcase, which is where we use Reviewr's showcase platform to host our People's Choice. So when Kyle was talking about that one-stop shopping, we really utilize their platform for everything that we do, which makes it so seamless. What we used to do was we would have all of the submissions come into our old submission platform, and we would then have to extract all of that data and pull it into this massive PowerPoint presentation. We would have to bring our judges into an all-day meeting, and we would have to go through and read all of the descriptions out loud, and it was just such a tedious project. And then to go into our People's Choice, we then had to pull all of those high-res photos, which you can imagine how long that took to pull those, and we would post them on Facebook, and it was just hours and hours of unnecessary work that we were able to strip down to just a short, condensed amount of time. So making that process not only easier for us, but also easier for all of our users, whether that be the entrants themselves or the judges. And then once we get into, like I said, that People's Choice, then that brings in our audience too. So it makes it that much easier for everyone.
Yeah, especially too when you talk about like multiple phases, or I guess from the application side of things. We heard a horror story the other day. It was before Reviewr, obviously, but they had used, I want to say like Dropbox or Box, and so they had a form that was submitted like through Google or through email, and then they had the applicants have to go to like a Dropbox type of service and upload all the like, supporting material. And they'd have to then combine the two of them. But it was for a scholarship, and when they were doing that, they actually left one out from the export from Dropbox. So when they actually go to do the review, there was a student that didn't get reviewed for a scholarship, which is terrible to hear. And it's not because they didn't mean to. Of course, it's just when you have things kind of disconnected in multiple places. And then from the user's perspective, that likely means that they had to sit down, fill out part of their information in one spot, and then leave and go somewhere else to add the files. And I'm guaranteeing that they were a little bit concerned about, like, did they receive my submission? Did they get the files? Do they know what goes with what? And so it's super important that to think about that from each user's perspective, applicant, admin, and judge or review committee, that when they go to do their work, that they're not leaving. Everything that they need to be successful is already there in one spot. And that also leads into kind of the expectations up front. One thing that we want to avoid doing is having people start the process and then have no idea what's being expected from them. We have tools in place that can help send reminder emails, let them start, save, come back later. But one thing we worked with Jen this year is on the very front end, kind of making those expectations and almost like a pre-preparation available to the applicants.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's so much room. I mean, we're all humans, right? So there's so much room for human error. Like Kyle, like you said, when you're having to go from platform to platform, which actually brings me to my next point about Reviewr really being that one-stop shop, because not only, like you said, we kind of have, you go from having all of your guidelines, all of your rules right there on the landing page, which allows your entrance to really know what they're getting into, which I, as an administrator, and you're wanting to really convey kind of what's expected, having that all there on the same platform that they can then go into their submission and they can fill that out. And now what I'm really excited about is that Reviewr is launching their payment processing, because like I said, there's so much room for human error. And when you're maybe getting emails after the fact, a lot of times people can think, oh, is this a thank you email from the actual platform? Is it phishing? Is it this? Is it that? And then maybe they don't click, or maybe they just see it and then they look past it, they don't read the whole thing, and then you miss out on the payment, and then you're doing all of that follow-up. And again, there's just human error that happens with that, and it's just, again, making it that much more streamlined to have everything be all in one place where you go through, you read the guidelines, you click submit, and then you go right into your payment. And I'm so excited to try out that tool and get that implemented on our software.
Cool. Yeah, it's kind of the full circle from account creation to payment. The applicant kind of starts that journey, it's all together. But just to kind of quickly to recap, again, it's all about making the submission process as simple as possible. And you really need to look at your process itself and figure out what's actually necessary, which may not be necessary. And we'll get into that here in a second about the data aspect of things. But and then also looking at the workflow. So, I am a huge advocate, and if anybody's interested in this, or if you're doing it now, please throw it in the chat box. But we can sidebar on another conversation about splitting up the award process into a nomination version and a nominee version, because one thing that we've started to hear quite a bit of is that the nominators obviously are putting forth their time and energy to fill this out. And even though both Jen and myself might have the same kindness to submit nominations, she may put forth more time and energy into it than I did. She might be a better writer than I am. And so when you go to do the actual review and selection process, you're really not comparing apples to apples as apples to oranges. And is it fair for the nominee to get evaluated on potentially inaccurate data from the nominator? And so it's kind of a fun effort to make the nomination step one and then make the nominee do kind of their own element, and that's the element that gets reviewed. I don't think that's a part of her program, but it's something that we are seeing quite a bit of that. If anybody's interested, we'd love to talk more about. And that leads us into the data. So, we talked a little bit about just now making sure that we think through what we're collecting. It could be multimedia, it could be short answers and essays, letters of recommendation. Obviously, the programs are built around data, but the first thing that we want to look at is what's really essential. A lot of groups, at least like maybe the first time working with Reviewr, they'll kind of work as a team to figure out all these really elaborate submission forms that are quite complex. And of course, that takes away from the submission experience from the applicant, but then they collect all this data that they don't really do a whole lot with. Or if they do something with it, they give it to the review team, and then the review team gets overwhelmed because it's not really necessary for the review process itself. So it's all about thinking through what type of data are we collecting, making sure that we're staying hyper specific and it actually serves a purpose. And then some of the more complex data, photos, videos, letters of recommendation, how are we actually collecting that? Because if you're using things like emails and Dropbox, I just kind of gave you guys that horror story. It's not easy to upload, videos. If I was to try to send Jen an email right now with a 10-minute video presentation or something like that, it's likely going to bounce back or fail because of the file size. So then she's going to have to go to like a Dropbox service and get it. So how do we kind of put this all into one condensed place? Jen, any insights into, I guess, the importance of data in your programs or how you guys are collecting it?
Definitely. So we've been in this awards program since 2013 was the first year that we did it. So we really had, all of these years, we've really been able to kind of fine tune our processes across the board. And the biggest changes I think have come into our submission area. We used to kind of make it where it was you could see your application step by step. And what we really found from our users and everything, from an administrative perspective, my outlook is always making it as easy as possible for your user, because that's going to make them give your association more credibility first and foremost, and it's going to make them come back. And especially in terms of an awards program, you want them to come back, and you also want them to potentially brag about your awards program to their professional peers. Since I work mostly with nonprofit professional associations, you want them to talk to their industry peers and say, hey, we applied for this award, and then making it so that it was a good experience. And so with this process, the submission form, like I said, we used to have it segmented, and a big feedback point that we got was that these people that were applying, they want to know all of the questions up front. So I think transparency is really important here, making sure that your information is available at the beginning so that people kind of know what they're getting into, and then they can collect all of the data that they need and upload it right away. And then in terms of data, we've gone year by year, we reevaluate the questions that we're asking, and we have to say, what are we doing with this? And really there's three groups of people, I would say, to think about, at least in our respect with our awards programs, which is your entrant, your judges, and your audience. And so if you're pulling data and it's really not being used for any of those three groups of people, if it's not finding value with any of those groups of people, then why are you asking for it? If you're not going to be using it in your PowerPoint presentation or in your judging materials or maybe in a press release that you're sending, if you're not using it and if it's not adding value, then take that weight off of yourself to collect the data and take it off of your user, because then you're just condensing your form and you're really asking the questions that you need to know the answers for. And then that's, again, going to make your users see whether it's in your presentation at your awards ceremony, if they see that the information that they submitted is in the presentation, that's going to make them happy, because when they see that, let's say that you have them fill out 50 fields and only 15 are in the presentation, then that might leave a negative taste in their mouth. So I would just say thinking about those three groups of people is really important, and how you can consolidate. One example we have is we were collecting team member, for all of our projects, we were collecting up to 6 team members' contact information. And we said, we've never contacted any of these individuals before. We've never called them or emailed them. Why are we asking for this information? So now we just collect their names so that we can recognize them at the award ceremony, because we know that our audience appreciates that, but we don't need to collect their contact information, which is one less step for the user.
Yep, it's little things like that that really do add up, especially when they're applying time spent on tasks and things like that. Plus, the applicant may not have all the information about their team members, so now there's multiple touch points going back and forth. And that kind of leads me into another item. At least within Reviewr, we do a lot of third-party data capture. So one really common example is both with an award program and a scholarship, where there's like letters of recommendation involved. On the grant side of things, sometimes there's like it goes to a centralized person to approve the submission before it goes into review. And so at least with letters of recommendation, we actually have a really cool tool where the individual filling out the submission can put in who's writing that letter, and they can trigger a notification to go to that person. And then when they go to upload the file, it actually gets appended to the applicant's profile. And so the actual individual doing this submission doesn't have to upload it themselves. Now, of course, they could. There's a lot of benefits behind that. Number one is I've never seen a negative written letter of recommendation. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asked to write the letter. But it still is typically a private conversation. So a lot of times when they write the letters, they want to keep it out of the hands of the applicant. So doing this workflow does do that. The other item that we see is that from an applicant's perspective, they get hung up. They're filling out the submission forms. If you get to a letter of recommendation question, what happens if they don't have it? So now they're going off on their own, trying to track it down and get it from somebody else, and they can't progress. They're kind of stuck and waiting on somebody else. So kind of using data or technology to power this, it allows them to keep moving forward with their application, waiting for the letter to come through. And then of course, once it's done, it does get aggregated back together. So that's kind of one thing. The other item is multimedia. So I don't know if it's just kind of the current landscape that we're in, but we're seeing a lot of multimedia-based submissions. And when I say that, I mean like both award scholarships and grants, the applicant, instead of doing like short answers and essays, is actually doing like a 3 to 5 minute little video presentation. It's highly personal. The review team loves it. It's way more engaging. It allows their personalities to shine through. It's also awesome from like a post-program marketing collateral, being able to do like video testimonials of the applicants and things like that. And so when you're collecting videos and multimedia, how are you dealing with bandwidth limitations? How is it being stored? What's the security behind it? Those are all things that we have you guys covered for. And then I know Jen is using this herself, but ultimately with our file integrations, it actually gets embedded in our system. So if I'm a judge and I'm supposed to be reviewing somebody's letter of recommendation and a video, I can actually view them and watch them in Reviewr while I fill out my scorecards. So we're obviously collecting powerful data, but then again, it goes back to what she mentioned, which was the user experience, where we're collecting powerful data, but we're actually doing something with it in one spot.
Definitely. And like it's written on the screen right there, and it's long-term archiving. So
Yeah.
we, with how many years that we've been with Reviewr, we can go back still to those submissions and we can pull that data and have those photos, and then you're not having to store it. Like I said at the beginning, we were pulling all of those photos and all of that content onto our computers. And of course, that's a lot of storage that you then have to supply. And this gives you that storage, and it keeps everything together in one spot where you know exactly where to look. Because I know, especially dealing with nonprofit professional associations and maybe not having staff that's always working on all of this, and having a centralized location that you can have both for staff and volunteers, or just one or the other, is very nice. Because I know from an administrative standpoint, I work with volunteers all day long, and being able to work with them in this platform makes it that much easier.
Yep, and that's a good segue into the next step because a lot of times those volunteers are part of the review committees, and they're collaborating within the tools. And so we'll spend a few minutes talking about this. This is probably my favorite slide. So, and if we think about these programs from an administrator perspective, it's easy for us to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what, I can hunker down. I can do this with email, spreadsheets, Dropbox links, back and forth. It's not going to be pleasant, but I can do it. Obviously, we've talked about some of the side effects of doing that, which we want to avoid. But I get that as an admin, we feel that our own time is limitless, even though it's definitely not. Um, so then we start thinking about from the applicant's perspective, making their lives easier. But one thing that we often overlook is that review committee and that judging committee. Maybe I'm very selfish because we built it from our own judging perspective, so it's kind of close to home, but they are volunteering their time. And so a couple of things need to come into play. Number one is how do we make them as efficient as possible and be sensitive to their time? And then number two is how do we, if we are going to be sensitive to their time, how do we get the most out of them? And so I'll let Jen mostly talk about this because she has a really cool review process. But at the end of the day, at least for the time being, there's probably not going to be a lot of in-person review committee meetings. So if you have like a 30-person board that goes through and they actually spend 10 hours on a conference in person talking through applications, that probably can't happen anymore for the short term. And so if we're going to do that, maybe they're going to do them through Zoom, and that's great. So if we're going to have Zoom meetings to talk about the applications, how do you prepare them for that call? We want to avoid a bunch of people getting onto a phone call and wasting an hour or two of their time. And so having tools like Reviewr in place where they can do their judging and scoring, they can add their thoughts, they can add their communication, and that way when they join that Zoom conversation, they've already evaluated the submissions, the system has all the results kicked out, there's already notes from the judges, they can virtually share that, and so we're already virtually collaborating, and so we hop on that call and we can say, okay, look, here's the top 10 based on the results. Oh wow, it looks like Jen, you gave this one a score of XYZ, it's a bit lower than the average. Let's talk a little bit more about why you scored it that way, and all of us have a rough idea already because we're kind of part of that process. And then other thing too is I talked about when we got those spreadsheets mailed to us, or the 3-ring binders with the multimedia and like a CD-ROM format. How do we allow the review team to save their process? Because again, much like your applicants, they are procrastinators. They're not going to do the entire review process at one time. And so how do we do two things? One is allow them to work at their own pace, but then two, give you guys that visibility so you can kind of usher them along and send them reminders as deadlines approach.
Yeah, and to that point, like I said at the beginning of this, we used to have an all-day judging process where we would, like I said, we had already spent hours pulling all of those photos, high-res photos into a PowerPoint presentation, and we would actually have to have not only myself as staff to take notes during the judging process and to run that PowerPoint, but we would have to have volunteers, multiple volunteers to attend as well, to read through the project descriptions, because you couldn't just have one person because they wouldn't be able to talk by the end of the day with how many descriptions that they were having to read, having upwards of 100 applications. So we moving into this kind of virtual environment and allowing your judges, not only asking them, you're saving so much in terms of time, you're not only time, but costs. For a nonprofit professional association, of course, budget is always on the mind. So when you're talking about saving food and beverage, potentially venues, staffing costs, that can be a huge saving for your association to have your judges be able to be independent and be able to do everything on their own terms. And that means that we usually give our judges 2 weeks to be able to judge. We kind of tell them that you could judge at your own pace, with the recommendation that maybe you do a couple a day, or you focus on one category at a time and space it out however you so choose. Like Kyle said, a lot of times judges are procrastinators as well, so they might be still cramming everything into the day or two before it's due, but at least you're giving them a bigger window when you're asking them to do this huge job for you. And our judges are volunteers, and they're doing this on behalf of our association. And then the other great piece is that for us, with our projects, we can't have anyone that is a part of the firms that is submitting judge, which made our judging pool really small. Having everything be through the Reviewr platform and having it be virtual, we can ask judges out of state to participate and or potential individuals to judge. And then that can also, from an association perspective, we've asked presidents of other chapters to participate. We've been able to talk to principals at firms that we would want to have more involvement in our association, potentially as sponsors or whatever kind of involvement, members, and we can ask though, and maybe those firms are participating as entrants, so we haven't been able to kind of pull them in a different respect. And now we can potentially reach out to these principals from different firms and high-level professionals and get them on as judges too. So it just really opens up just a variety of opportunities. It makes it, again, like I said, such a savings in terms of time and even in cost.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it really kind of just jumps in. I'm going to go to the last slide, the experience itself, right? So here at Reviewr, we kind of have our own internal mission statements for our own employees that we kind of live and die by. And one of the things is we always strive for excellence. We kind of go off of how do we make today a better version of yesterday's best? And we feel that our clients are kind of the same way. It's when it comes to the applicants and the judges, it is very much an experience. We want to make sure that when they are logging in as a volunteer, this program was built for them specifically for the tasks that they're being asked. It's not downloading spreadsheets, filling out the scores, putting it back into a folder and emailing it to you. It's a kind of an all-encompassing workflow for them. And the whole idea is how do we make these programs less transactional and more of an engaging start to finish full circle experience that doesn't just say, hey, here's submissions, we review them, here's the winners. Maybe Jen can talk about the showcase, but that's why we built the public showcase page in the first place, is that we want to make it a full circle from the day that somebody applies to the day that they're celebrated. So that's a big piece of it. And then also part of that is understanding what technology is here for. It's not just a cost for the sake of a cost. It's very much an operational budgeting thing. We always talk about how it's the equivalent of like a builder having a tool belt. The tool belt itself isn't the thing that's going to build the house. It just gives the builder the ability to actually do it the best way possible. And so she just talked a little bit about having like other states and other chapters join the review process. Well, now that opens up a whole nother can of conversation of how do you even do the review? Do you guys have all review members judge everybody? Is it based off of expertise? Do you have, judging categories? What happens if there's a conflict of interest? What about the sheer sake of volume? Is it fair to give one review member 100 submissions to go through, or do we want to randomize it and give each judge, no more than 7, but no less than 4 to keep it fair? Those are all things that we've thought through and have tools built in place for, because we've seen literally everything. And so at the end of the day, it's how do we leverage technology to make everybody's lives as efficient as possible, but also really just up the ante, right? Up the experience for the people involved.
Yeah, I think that, like I said at the beginning, the biggest takeaway for me as an administrator is making things as user-friendly as possible. If you make it easy, the experience will be that much better for that individual. And then again, that gives your association credibility, your awards, grants, scholarship program credibility, and then that will, with credibility, you should be able to grow. That's kind of the method behind why your user experience should always be positive. And then from a support perspective too, something that we do that I didn't mention before with judges, just to make it that much easier and a better experience, we started doing a kind of judging overview process where we usually have 3 judges and we got all 3 on the call, and we would walk through the platform with them while we were on the phone and kind of point out where to go and the steps of how to do it, because while they would get the instructions, Reviewr has a really great packet that they send around that has really detailed instructions for how to do it. There's something about going through the motions with someone that's guiding you through, verbally speaking it to you. So we found that that's been super beneficial. And like Kyle said, with everything, we are in such a visual world right now. And so just walking people through makes it that much easier. And that also, being in a visual world, the showcase that Kyle was talking about makes our lives, like I said, so much easier, just from the standpoint of not having to pull everything onto a completely different software, but being able to send out this this simple link that people can just go to and and then we can pull those results very easily straight from Reviewr. There is no part of it that is manual from an administrative perspective, which again, for me, working with nonprofit professional associations, budget is always on my mind. And so this all-in platform has really benefited the chapter in so many ways, budget being one, but obviously just ease of experience. And with experience also comes growth and evolution, and we've really worked with Reviewr has really worked with us to tweak and fine tune our platform to make it work best for us, which one way that they're doing that is that payment processor, and they listen to that request and they're implementing it to really make it that all in one-stop shop.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love what you said about kind of that linear process where the experience leads to kind of more transparency and helps build up the program's reputation, and then the reputation is what results in overall growth. And so, and that kind of ties back into the payment processing where, you know, a lot of times you guys are leveraging the awards program in conjunction with your conferences and things like that as revenue generating opportunities. It's a marketing effort and revenue generating. And so how do we promote these programs and make people want to actually apply and pay the however much it is to submit an application if you're going to go the payment route? So yeah, I think, you know, go ahead.
And to that point with the payment, we were having to send them to a different payment processor, and then
Sure.
that causes confusion because then you get a lot of questions of, well, is this my ticket or is this the payment for the submission? We get that question so much by having to send them to a different site for payment. So by having it all be in one, it's that much clearer. And again, it's that transparency of making it so that it's streamlined and it's step by step, and you're not being pulled into different areas and you're not missing anything. And that human error is really taken out of the equation.
Yep. And maybe just a closing note before we jump into a Q&A is, and why we do this in the first place. And so we built Reviewr because we came from this space. We were very actively involved in these programs, and you guys are going to do awards, grants, and scholarships with or without Reviewr. You know, no matter what, you know, pandemics are going on or what's happening, like these programs are not going to stop. They're still going to happen. And so we feel very passionate about why you guys do them from an award perspective, the marketing and what it does for your membership base and your association. From a grant and scholarship perspective, that means that you guys are a charitable organization, that you guys are doing great things for our communities. And so if we're going to do these programs with or without Reviewr, how do we as a company get involved and make the process as engaging as possible and create that experience for everybody involved? And then from a webinar perspective, you know, the best part of what we do here is we work in every imaginable industry. We do some really cool nursing awards. We do some stuff within like the frozen and refrigerated food industries. We do things with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We do National Cattlemen's Beef. So it's just all these random groups. And the best part about that is that they're no different than you guys. They are doing some things that might be hyper specific and unique to them. Like Jen mentioned, the payment processing, we see that and we listen. You know, we can sit here all day throwing darts against the wall saying, hey, this would be a cool feature, spend a lot of time, spend a lot of money building it in. But if it's not relevant and you guys aren't going to use it, then what's the point? And so the platform and everything we talk about is literally built by people like yourselves for people like you guys. And with these webinars, the whole idea is we can bring in thought leaders within the space to kind of, you know, work with one another. We want to do more like thought groups and like LinkedIn groups and things like that. That way, if you guys have questions, you guys can, you know, go to each other, and we're just kind of ushering that conversation. So, you know, it's kind of my little closing statement. I'm not sure if Jen has anything else she wants to add. If not, you know, I definitely would love to jump into any questions that might have come up either for us or for her organization, things like that.
Yeah, looks like you have one question in the chat.
Yeah, so integrations with Salesforce. So the challenge with integrations is that every one of you on the call today is likely using a different membership database than one another. And when you ask about integrations, each of you probably is looking for some type of different integration. Is it just a single sign-on? Is it us passing Reviewr data to Salesforce? Is it Salesforce passing data back to us? Is it a combination of both? So the simple answer is yes. You know, we have a full development shop here, and we can do integrations. We do quite a bit of it. It's not like a one-click, you know, hey, let's integrate with Salesforce. It really requires both your team and our teams to kind of sit down. You know, Jen and I talked at the call earlier about this. about figuring out what data is actually necessary. Same thing goes with the integration. What do we want it to do? What benefit is it going to provide? And then we can stub out like an integration plan and make sure we do it the right way. Great question though. Other questions, and again, they don't have to be feature related. They could be your guys' own insights or unique things that you guys are doing. If you guys have any tidbits on what you feel are like the 1 or 2 absolute essentials to running a successful program, I'd love to hear that. Anything else you guys want to go over?
Yeah, an essential from an administrative perspective that I can share, have a checklist. We have a very detailed checklist that I continue to build off of every year, and you add and you remove and you maybe move. I think mine is set up by month of what we need to keep in mind, and one of those is about a year out, we reach out to Reviewr and we get our platform set up for the following year for the following awards program. And so, and it just having that list of things, like I said, I'm such a big proponent. I am a diehard list maker and follower, and crossing off on the list is one of those things that I love to do. That is who I am. And so for me, I have just learned, being in this management association world for in my 7th year now, and knowing that having 3 different clients is a lot to keep track of. And same thing with an awards program. It is a lot to keep track of. There are a lot of different facets, just like what we were saying at the beginning with the 3 different groups of people that you have to think about. Entrants, judges, audiences. When you put it into perspective like that, that's a lot of details that you are being asked to manage. And so having a really thorough checklist is something that I cannot stress enough, just so that it takes out, again, that component of human error.
Yeah, that's a good thought. And one other thing too, just a best practice, is that maybe the last item on that checklist too is like post-program or post-award surveys to both applicants and judges. I talked about how we didn't just build the software by throwing a bunch of time and money against the wall, hoping we built features that you like. We worked with you guys. Same thing goes for your program. Maybe interviewing and doing like a survey for the applicants about what the experience was like, what things that they would like to see moving forward. Judging committee, how do we know? Maybe the judges are completely overworked. Maybe they don't have time to look at 15 submissions. You don't know that until they tell you. So proactively reach out, do the surveys, take those results, and then of course, don't wait a full year to do something with it. Start to implement it right away. That way we hear them, we do something with it, and we don't forget about it.
And it makes you that much conscious of the people that you're working with and their time. And I think, again, that gives you more credibility, it makes you more transparent, and it makes you a better partner to work with, because when you're approaching your vendors, your judges, your audience, when you're giving them time to be able to, or your entrants, I should say, when you're giving them time to be able to wrap their mind around what you're asking them to do and plan out, you're giving yourself the opportunity to plan, and you're also giving them the opportunity to plan, which I think is always well received, versus when you're kind of going to somebody and asking someone, hey, do you have time next week to do X, Y, and Z? They might not have it, but if you say, hey, in 2 months, this is kind of what we're looking for. Is this something that you would be interested in doing? And I just think that that's a sign of respect. So I think it's, being organized has so many benefits, and that's why having that checklist is important.
Yep. And so, not to get too off topic and take too much time, but one thing that comes to mind when you say that is, one thing that we're seeing a lot of is if they're very deadline based, if there's a dedicated open and close period, once it closes, that doesn't mean you can't stop capturing data. So a lot of our clients are doing like an open-ended just data capture form, like, hey, sign up for updates for next year's award program. That way, and I know it's not all about the volume. It's definitely not. But if you are trying to increase the volume of nominations for these programs, that's step number 1, is that, in the off season, we'll call it, still collect info about people who are interested in applying. That way we can invite them to join when it opens up. And then from the review side of things, we actually have some clients that do a really basic form, and it's not even relevant to Reviewr or the judging process. It's like a contribution form where they can fill it out, and then maybe based off like a set number of drop downs, you can figure out like what they're interested in, donors, volunteer time, speakers, judges, whatever it is. So you're building this pool of people who want to contribute to your program. And so what happens if, a judge drops out? No longer do you necessarily have to recruit somebody new. You can dive into that pool of people who have shown interest in your program and then add them from there. So
definitely. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now as one of the awards program that we're doing with the current environment. We're not able to host our physical awards ceremony this year. And I feel like a lot of things right now are pivoting and being put on hold, and using that time wisely to create plans and collect the data, like you're saying, Kyle, I think is now more than ever that much more valuable in terms of staying in contact and communicating and using your time wisely. And that goes without being in the current environment. While our awards program is one day of the year, we can plan the awards program and we can get everything done really in a 6-month time period. But that outlook, that calendar that I was talking about, that the checklist, that's set up for a whole year, because again, you're trying to give your people the most time to be able to work on this project, so that you're not having to, I work with volunteers, so to give them as much time as possible that they can use to finish whatever it is that they're working on, and to accomplish things that they might not be able to do in a more condensed period of time, whether that's coming up with, a social media calendar, or having that specific outreach to your entrants to maybe think about what it is that you want to say, think about how you want to communicate, and be able to do that effectively. So I think definitely use your time wisely now more than ever.
Yep. And a super good question just came in. So somebody asked about collecting, I guess, demographic and diversity information. How do we ensure we're collecting it kind of in a sensitive way? And then there's a second part to that talked about how for their program, they do solely nominations. The nominee isn't involved at all. And so how do we make sure that the nominator isn't just making assumptions about those demographics and they really are what they are? So I assume that Jen can maybe talk even more intelligent about this than I can, because number one is that one thing that we're seeing is that you may want to collect demographic information, but you can't force their hand. So having like a refuse to answer type of thing, or a non-disclosure, is number one step probably. And then number two is what happens once you capture it. So there's two use cases. There's from an admin perspective, if you guys are collecting demographic information, do you want to hide that from yourselves? Which we can do. We have some clients of ours that actually have like an Ernst & Young or like an outside like accounting firm that gets involved. And they're the ones who actually look at the data, and they actually do a lot of the fine-tuned detailing of the data itself. They'll look at it, they'll blind it, they'll come up with like, you had X number of people from this demographic versus this one, but they're the ones as a third party that does it, not the admins themselves. Don't see a lot of that, but we do see some of it. If people are interested in that, I can track down some examples and make some introductions. But the more relevant piece to that is on the review side. So it sounds like this is for like an award program, but this is super specific with scholarships and grants. So within Reviewr, we have like built-in blinding capability, so you can target data sets. So when the review team goes to do their evaluation, they physically can't see that content, so it doesn't kind of sway their vote. But as an admin, or at least in reporting, you guys are still capturing it. It does become a challenge though when the nominator fills it out, not the nominee, because unless you have a way of verifying it, there's literally nothing you can do. So I guess very selfishly, that's one of the reasons why I like that split process where the nominee does get involved at some point, because that way you are ensuring data accuracy. Worst case, you just go with the assumption that what the nominator filled out is actually true. And then as you narrow it down to maybe finalists or the actual recipients, then you do like some spot checking interviews with the nominee or doing your own research.
I 100% agree with that. I think my first response to that question is, what are you doing with the data? Always. Anytime I collect data with my associations, what are we doing with it? And then if there is a need to collect the data, then being sensitive, especially given the type of data that you're collecting, I think that it's important to, like Kyle said, utilize the platform and make it so that if you can, both on the judging side and on the showcase side, if showcasing is something that you need to do, you can hide specific data fields. And you can change it from, we hide certain data fields from the judging platform that we then show in the showcase page. And then in terms of your reporting, I would just, again, be careful with who you're sending your reporting to. That's more secure data from my perspective. So I think, again, it's just a matter of being sensitive. And like Kyle said, if there's a way to bring in the nominee to verify, I think that would be such a great step to add to your process.
Yeah, totally. And maybe to go further, this is more on like the extreme side of things, but we can even have it where we blind that demographic data from you guys as admins, and then we can write you guys a custom report that kind of aggregates it for you. So like of your X number of submissions, 54% were this, right? That way you guys are getting high level things because you need to know that potentially, but it's not something that you're privy to seeing. So that's an extreme use case, but we can do that too. That was a super good question. Any other questions that we might have? And with that too, if there aren't any other questions and things do pop up later, so a couple things, we do record all our webinars. It won't be today, but at some point next week, we'll be sending out kind of a follow-up with the recording. That way you guys can view it, share it with your friends, other associations, whatever it might be. But as you kind of take the weekend, if questions do pop up, it's like, oh, hey, I wonder how this would work within Reviewr, how my process works, or I wonder how, what Jen would think about doing this just because of her background, get kind of different feedback than somebody like myself. I would assume that she'd be happy to speak with you guys. So feel free to send those along. I can make introductions. I can pass along those questions as they become necessary. So if you have no questions today, that's totally fine. But just because they may not be there now, if they do come up, make sure you let us know.
Absolutely.
Cool. Why don't we, it doesn't look like any other questions are popping up. We'll go ahead and just wrap things up here. And again, I do want to appreciate both everybody's time for joining and also Jen for taking the time out of her schedule to talk with us. Not to jump the gun and speak too much in advance, but I'd love to do another webinar or two with her on different topics, just because I think it's great to have other people's feedback who are involved in more than just one program or involved with the software. So
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Again, look out for a message sometime probably next week from us with the recording. And I look forward to answering questions that pop up, but I hope everybody has a nice weekend.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.